and welcome to the Men's Therapy Directory podcast. Today, my guest is Christoph Zepeda. He is a therapist in the San Francisco Bay Area. He specializes in PTSD, complex trauma, and recent critical incidents across the lifespan. He also works with adults who were abused as children, and particularly how this abuse affects relationships between siblings. Christoph, thanks so much for joining me today. Welcome to the podcast. So I thought we'd just jump right into it and talk about, first of all, barriers to men seeking therapy. Pretty general question, but for you, what have you seen or what do you think are the barriers for men actually just seeking out therapy?
I don't know what it is, but I feel like most of the clients, most of the men that I start seeing, it's usually their first time in therapy, and it's maybe been in their like late 20s or 30s. And so I think part of it is maybe it hasn't really been suggested or socialized for men to seek therapy earlier. Usually I'm seeing people when they've gone through a really rough time that has compounded over time.
Yeah, so I've seen the same in my practice as well, and talking to a lot of therapists. There are a number of men who don't really make it into therapy until, like you say, like late 20s, when maybe stuff is kind of built up. It's a pretty general question, but how can men who are maybe resistant to therapy actually benefit from therapy?
I guess for one thing is, since there's not as many male therapists, part of it is it might be disarming to work with another male identified therapist. There might be some insecurities that they may not feel comfortable disclosing to someone else. And how they can benefit is basically sort of approaching it with an open mind and curiosity. My style is pretty relational and casual. I kind of see the work as something that we're doing together, or side by side, as opposed to sort of top down. And really just being open to finding what works for you. And if it doesn't feel like you feel comfortable with the therapist, then it's okay to keep looking for the right match.
That's a great point, Christoph. In terms of if you're not happy with your therapist, if the dynamic is not going well, that doesn't mean that all therapy is going to be like that. It's really a lot about the fit between the therapist and the client. I'm curious something that sort of struck me when we were just talking now is the word disarming. He said therapy can be disarming, and I'm wondering, is that a good thing?
I think ultimately yes, because it can wear down a person to sort of feel like they have to fit a certain mold, and they might be holding a lot of tension over time, and so to sort of be able to find a space where they're able to relax and explore themselves and go more internal. I think that can really help someone kind of embrace a fuller life.
So the word disarming may be actually an empowering kind of concept as opposed to like a threatening concept in the long run, yeah?
Yeah. And it makes complete sense and is reasonable for folks who've maybe undergone a lot of trauma to be a little bit hypervigilant or uncomfortable with the thought of kind of letting down one's guard. But one of the drawbacks of maybe not disarming is that maybe there might be other things that they're missing because they're using so much energy to sort of stay afloat.
Yeah, so definitely a little scary at first to dredge up some stuff, but then disarming, letting that guard down can be a growth opportunity perhaps. So Christoph, I wanted to maybe segue now into a couple of your specialties that you that you deal with in your practice. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about trauma work.
Yeah, so I use attachment-focused EMDR, which is sort of like a rapid processing therapeutic tool. The concept kind of goes that like trauma stored on the right side of the brain, non-structured, non-linguistic, non-chronological, non-sequential, and non-verbal. And that's why things that happened a long time ago can feel like they're happening in the moment, because there's this like timeless, frozen, fragmented sense to it. And then the left side of the brain is the more like organized, logical, verbal, linear side. And so what I will do is sort of invite somebody to bring up a distressing event. I kind of ask them like kind of to explore like what was the image, what was the body sensation, what was the emotion and beliefs that came up with that. And usually it sort of activates in their neural network, their brain system, that like the previously unprocessed overwhelming event. And then there's a few ways of doing it, but in the past I've either tapped people's knees, just alternate, like, and it sort of like helps both hemispheres of the brain communicate with each other. So rather than feeling like this sort of confusing, disorganized state of like, I'm feeling overwhelmed and I don't know why, people often will feel like, oh, this kind of reminds me of this past event, but I'm in the here and now, and that was back then. And this person actually is not the same person that maybe perpetrated something else.
Let me just pause you for a second, just for our viewers and listeners. So your specialty being the attachment-focused EMDR. So can you explain what EMDR stands for?
Oh, that's right. Yeah. So EMDR it stands for eye movement desensitization reprocessing, and it was initially kind of started by Francine Shapiro, who like pioneered. It was very eye movement based. It sort of has evolved since then, but it's been useful for folk like for veterans and other sort of impactful incidents.
Yeah. So like you're saying, the EMDR has evolved and it continues to evolve. And what you were talking about is using some tapping, say on different parts, on knees, and sort of bilateral, so that activating different parts of the brain. And then the key word in the EMDR is the reprocessing, right? So if clients coming in with a lot of, say, anxiety or depression symptoms related to a previous trauma, you're breaking that pattern, it sounds like, of reprocessing and getting that actually done in the brain and through the experience really in there in the office with the therapist. So you're doing the reprocessing live in a way, which it's very fascinating to me because I've been resistant to EMDR in terms of getting like a certification or studying it more. But the more I hear about it, and I'm talking to more and more therapists of how effective it is. So it's great to hear that you're doing that. And especially you were talking about with veterans, you were work with veterans as well. I've definitely heard that the EMDR is really effective with that group of people and getting some good results. Yeah.
And I think also one of the misconceptions about trauma is folks may think that there's like the big T's and the little T's. The big T traumas can be like witnessing violence, and or like going to a war, a sexual assault. But there's also like the little T's that happen over time, like the stressors of living in poverty, or the not being validated because of one's race, gender, or other aspects of their identity. And so over time, it's sort of like this invalidation or chronic fear that can happen, and that can sort of have similar impacts as if somebody did survive a disaster.
I see. So I like how you describe that, like a capital T and a lowercase t, and the smaller t's can start to compile and stack up. So that can often be overlooked, I imagine, for the client as well as for the therapist. But I think it's great that you're aware of that the cumulative over time, a lot of these stressors can build up to sort of a traumatic kind of reaction in the body and the brain. I want to ask you in terms of, say, maybe triggers. What, say, someone listening or watching right now could be something that could trigger them, or just the concept, I guess, just to start out with is what is a trigger, and to be aware of what they might be, and the sort of the benefit of being aware of one's own triggers.
Yeah, I guess when I'm listening for maybe someone's triggers that I'm working with, just because I want to kind of be on the same page with what triggers them, and so we can sort of approach it in a sort of safer experiential process, because maybe in the past it wasn't bearable or safe to address it, and that can then lead to a lot of shame in addressing it because maybe they had a prior feeling of failure. And so once, I don't know, there's just sort of a feeling I get after working with folks. It almost feels like a hot spot that I'm sort of, when we talk about the subject, I might like listen to like, ask somebody, what are they noticing in their body? Because maybe they kind of they haven't been feeling safe in their body in the past because it wasn't safe to be there. And so then they may be disconnected. And I sort of listen to both like to the tone of their voice, and really just try to let them know that they don't have to feel ashamed for having a response, which I think goes back to one of the barriers for seeking therapy is they might have negative biases towards their responses. But just even acknowledging that they're having a response is also a strength, because then they at least have a direction where to focus.
Yeah, I love that. Just simply acknowledging, right, that yes, I am triggered. And I mean, everyone gets triggered by something. That's just, we're humans. And to explore that, like you say, in the safety of a therapy space, and having, someone there the therapist who, instead of the client maybe feeling shameful, just having that non-judgmental therapist there to help them through being aware of their triggers, normalizing them, being aware of trauma. We all have trauma in our lives as well. So Christoph, we're going to wrap things up. Thanks so much for talking today. It's great to see you, and hopefully we can hang out in person sometime. We're both in the Bay Area here. And so for everyone out there who doesn't know about your practice, where can they find you online?
Yeah, so they can look up Zepeda Therapy, and they can also find me, of course, on the men's therapy directory.
Yeah.
And you can also look up attachment focus EMDR in Oakland. I'm also there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Well, Christoph, thanks so much for talking today, and for everyone out there listening, watching.
My cat is.
Oh, here we go.
Yes. Sorry about that.
The best form of therapy, right?
Yes.
Okay, everyone, please be well. Thanks so much for watching. Take care.